The day after our wedding, my husband's mom handed me a key and said, "This is for the house next door. I'll be moving in to supervise you." My husband smirked and said, "It's for the best." I smiled back and said, "Actually, I just sold that house yesterday." Their screams echoed as reality sank in. The day after our wedding, I was in the kitchen of our new home in Charleston, South Carolina, unpacking the last of the dishes. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow over the hardwood floors. I was humming softly, feeling content and hopeful about the future. As I placed the final plate in the cabinet, I heard the front door open. Expecting Brian, I turned with a smile, but it was Margaret, my mother-in-law, who stepped into the room. She was dressed impeccably, as always, in a tailored navy suit, her silver hair styled in a neat bob. In her hand, she held a small, ornate key. "Good morning, dear," she said, her voice smooth but carrying an undertone I couldn't quite place. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, Margaret," I replied, masking my surprise. "Would you like some coffee?" "No, thank you," she said, stepping closer. She held out the key towards me. "This is for the house next door. I've decided to move in to supervise you." I blinked, processing her words. "Supervise me?" "Yes," she said, her smile tight. "To ensure that you take proper care of Brian and manage the household appropriately. It's for the best." At that moment, Brian entered the kitchen, his expression neutral. He glanced at his mother, then at me, and shrugged. "It's for the best," he echoed. I felt a surge of emotions, anger, disbelief, and a touch of amusement. But I kept my composure, offering them both a calm smile. "Actually," I said evenly, "I sold that house yesterday." Margaret's eyes widened, and her face paled. "You what?" "I sold the house next door," I repeated. "A lovely couple is moving in next week." Brian's smirk faded, replaced by a look of shock. "Why would you do that without telling me?" "I didn't realize I needed your permission to make decisions about our neighborhood," I said, my voice steady. Margaret's composure cracked. "How dare you undermine me like this? I am Brian's mother. I have a right to be involved in his life." "And you will be," I assured her. "But moving in next door to supervise me is not the way." Margaret's hands trembled as she clenched the key. "This is unacceptable." "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said, maintaining my calm demeanor. "But the decision has been made." Brian looked between us, his face tense. "We need to talk about this." "Yes, we do," I agreed. "But not here. Let's sit down in the living room." Margaret huffed, but followed us as we moved to the adjacent room. We sat down, the tension palpable. "Margaret," I began, "I understand that you care deeply for Brian. But we are starting our own life together. We need space to grow as a couple." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "I only want what's best for my son." "And so do I said. "But hovering over us will not help. We need to establish our own routines and make our own decisions." Brian sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Mom, I love you, but maybe she's right. We need some space." Margaret's face hardened. "I see. So you're choosing her over me." "It's not about choosing," Brian said gently. "It's about boundaries." Margaret stood abruptly. "I need some air," she said, turning and leaving the house without another word. I looked at Brian, my heart pounding. "Did I handle that okay?" He nodded slowly. "I think so. But this isn't over." "I know," I said, leaning into him. "But it's a start." Over the next few days, Margaret's absence was noticeable. She didn't call or visit, and Brian grew increasingly anxious. "Maybe we should reach out," he suggested one evening as we sat on the porch. "I think she needs time," I said. "But if you feel it's right, give her a call." He nodded, pulling out his phone. After a brief conversation, he hung up, his expression unreadable. "She wants to meet for lunch tomorrow," he said. "Just the two of you?" I asked. He shook his head. "She asked for both of us." The next day, we met Margaret at a small cafe downtown. She was already seated when we arrived, her posture stiff. We exchanged pleasantries and ordered our meals. Once the waiter left, Margaret cleared her throat. "I've been thinking," she began. "Perhaps I was too hasty in my decision to move next door." I nodded, encouraging her to continue. I still have concerns, she said, her gaze fixed on me. But I realize that I may have overstepped. I appreciate that, I said sincerely. I want us to have a good relationship. She sighed, her shoulders relaxing slightly. I suppose we can work on that. Brian reached out, placing a hand over hers. Thank you, Mom. As we left the cafe, I felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but perhaps, with time and understanding, we could find common ground. A week passed after the cafe lunch. Things were quiet. Too quiet. Margaret stopped dropping by uninvited. No calls. No passive-aggressive texts. Just silence. Brian said it was progress. I wasn't so sure. Then one morning, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was the HOA president for our neighborhood. A sweet older lady named Cheryl, who I'd spoken to once during the house inspection. Hi, sweetheart, she said. I just wanted to confirm something. Margaret told the board she's moving into the house next to you. Said you're allowing her to do a full renovation and fence off part of your backyard to make room for family. You signed off on this, right? I froze. No, I didn't sign off on anything. I sold that house. A couple named the Thomases bought it. They move in next week. Cheryl paused. That's interesting. Because Margaret had a contractor here yesterday. Measured everything. Talked like the place was already hers. I hung up, heart pounding. That night, I told Brian. She said she dropped it, he said, running a hand through his hair. She told me she was backing off. That she wanted to give us space. Well, I said, holding up my phone, either she lied or she's lost it. He stared at the floor. Maybe she's just having trouble letting go. I looked at him hard. No, she's making moves behind our backs. Again. We decided to drive by the house next door. It was dark, but the front porch light was on. A folding chair sat near the door. A plastic grocery bag hung on the doorknob. I walked up and peeked through the window. Inside, someone had set up a blow-up mattress. A pillow. A blanket. A tray with teacups on the floor. Margaret had already moved in. I couldn't believe it. She had somehow gained access to the house. Slept there. Decorated. We called the real estate agent who sold the property. She was just as shocked. The Thomases closed last week. No one's supposed to be inside until move-in day. That's trespassing. Brian didn't sleep that night. Neither did I. The next morning, I walked over and knocked on the door. Margaret opened it in her robe, hair in curlers, like she had lived there for years. Oh, she said casually. You're up early. You don't own this house, I said. You can't be here. Her face didn't move. I talked to the Thomases. Lovely couple. We worked something out. What kind of something? I told them I'd take care of the place until they moved in. Said I was family. You're not, I snapped. And this is illegal. She stepped closer, voice cold. You might be my son's wife, but don't forget I've known him since birth. If I want to protect him, I will. Brian came up behind me wide-eyed. Mom, this has to stop. She stared at him. You think this is about me? No. This is about keeping you from being ruined by her. I felt my jaw clench. She's lying to everyone. Manipulating. You don't see it, Brian. But I do. We called the police. When they arrived, Margaret acted like it was all a big misunderstanding. Oh, officer, I had permission. Really? Just helping out some new neighbors. The Thomases backed us up. She hadn't asked them. Hadn't even spoken to them. She'd made a copy of the key during a showing weeks ago. She was removed from the house. But the damage was done. Our neighbors looked at us differently. Whispers started. Family drama. Crazy mother-in-law. Newlyweds with baggage. Margaret told everyone that I was the one who called the cops on her. That I turned her son against his own mother. Some believed her. Brian and I fought almost daily now. He was torn between loyalty and logic. Between the woman who raised him and the woman he married. You knew she was like this, I told him one night. Why didn't you warn me? She was never this bad before, he said quietly. Or maybe I just never saw it. A few days later, A formal complaint was filed with the HOA against me. Noise complaints. Disrupting the neighborhood peace. Uncooperative behavior. All made up. Turns out, Margaret had friends on the board. People she'd charmed with pies and prayer circles. People who didn't know the full story. She was playing the long game now. If she couldn't live next door, she'd try to make me leave. Brian tried to support me, but he was unraveling. Every day, he looked more tired. More lost. One night, he asked, "Do you think we made a mistake getting married?" It hit like a punch to the stomach. I didn't answer. Because the truth was, I didn't know anymore. A week after Margaret was removed from the house next door, the Thomases officially moved in. Sweet couple, mid-60s, loved gardening and birdwatching. They invited us over for lemonade one Saturday afternoon, eager to make friends. Their living room was cozy, freshly painted, with boxes still stacked near the walls. While chatting, Mr. Thomas mentioned something odd. "Did you know there's a hidden panel in the upstairs bedroom closet?" Contractor found it while checking the insulation. Thought it might have been for wiring. Brian and I exchanged a look. We excused ourselves, curiosity burning, and followed Mr. Thomas upstairs. He pulled back a rack of clothes, pushed gently on the back wall, and sure enough, a wooden panel creaked open. Inside was a small crawl space. A blanket. A bag of toiletries. A box of Margaret's favorite shortbread cookies. A notebook. I stepped back like I'd seen a ghost. Margaret had built herself a hideout. She'd planned to live secretly inside the house even after the Thomases moved in. We asked if we could take the notebook. The Thomases agreed, as long as we promised to turn it in if it had anything criminal. We flipped through it that night at our kitchen table. Inside were pages of notes about me. About us. Times I left the house. What I wore. Conversations I had with neighbors. Screenshots of my social media. Even photos, some taken through the window. She'd documented my life like I was part of an FBI case. But that wasn't the worst part. Near the end were letters. Drafted letters addressed to a lawyer. She was preparing a custody case for the child I didn't even have yet. She was planning to argue in advance that I was an unfit mother. My hands were shaking by the time I finished reading. Brian stared at the table, speechless. "She's been preparing for war," I whispered. Brian took a drive that night. Alone. Said he needed to think. When he got home at midnight, his face was pale. "She's not just overbearing," he said quietly. "She's unstable. She needs help." He had gone to her apartment, found her pacing in her nightgown, whispering to herself about protecting the family name. She didn't recognize him at first. Called him my sweet little soldier and tried to feed him soup that wasn't there. Brian called her doctor the next morning. Made an appointment. Forced her to go. Diagnosis: paranoid delusions. Likely early onset dementia. It made sense. But it didn't make it easier. Now we were caught in something even more complicated than revenge or resentment. Now we had to face something no one wants to admit. His mother was slipping away. A week later, a large envelope arrived at our house. No return address. Inside was a typed, signed copy of one of the custody letters from the notebook filed. She had mailed it before she was diagnosed. It had been delivered to a lawyer. And he, following Margaret's request, sent us a copy of the filing. It was official. She had tried to take legal steps to be the primary caregiver of a future child we didn't have. We contacted the lawyer immediately. After reviewing the updated medical diagnosis and our documentation, he agreed to drop the matter. But it didn't change the damage. My name was now linked to a family court filing. My reputation in the neighborhood was tarnished. And worst of all, my peace was shattered. The Thomases, God bless them, decided to install security cameras after finding Margaret's hideout. They didn't feel safe. A week later, they called us over. "Take a look at this," Mrs. Thomas said, setting a laptop in front of us. On screen, Margaret. At 3 a.m. In a long coat and slippers. Standing in their garden. Just staring. Motionless. For nearly 40 minutes. Just standing there, arms at her sides, eyes fixed on our house. Brian nearly knocked over the chair getting up. We took the footage to the police. It wasn't enough to press charges, but it was enough for a restraining order. We filed it that same week. 3 days after the restraining order went through, Child Protective Services showed up at our door. We didn't even have kids. They said they got an anonymous tip. The woman in the house is mentally unstable, possibly dangerous to children. We were shocked. Furious. Brian asked to see the report. The tipster had mentioned specific phrases: unstable behavior, emotional manipulation, unfit to raise a family. The exact same language from Margaret's notebook. She was trying to burn everything down on her way out. The agent apologized. Said this kind of thing happened more than people realized. Vindictive parents. Angry relatives. You'd be surprised what people will do when they think they're losing control. The police couldn't arrest her. CPS closed the case. But Margaret was still out there. And now, she was spiraling. We didn't know what she'd do next. Brian installed security systems. I changed my schedule. We kept lights on all night. I stopped going out alone. But none of it made me feel safe. Because the woman who wanted to supervise me now wanted to destroy me. And even with the diagnosis, the restraining order, and the warning signs, no one was stopping her. 3 weeks passed. We heard nothing from Margaret. No calls. No visits. No creepy appearances in the garden. It felt too quiet. Too fake. Brian tried to stay calm, telling himself she was getting help. I wasn't so sure. Then one rainy Wednesday, we heard a knock at the door. Not the front door. The back door. I looked through the curtain. Margaret. Soaked. Shaking. Her face pale, eyes wide. I froze. Brian opened the door slowly, keeping the chain latch on. Mom, what are you doing here? She looked at him, wild and exhausted. I need to speak to her. Alone. No, he said. I have to, she whispered. Brian turned to me. I didn't say anything. Just stared at her. She met my eyes. And for the first time ever, I saw fear. Not anger. Not hate. Fear. I was wrong, she said quietly. About everything. I stayed behind Brian. Then leave. I mean it, she whispered. I ruined my son's life. I thought I was helping. I didn't want him to be alone. You almost destroyed us, I said. She nodded. I know. That's why I did something. The next day, Brian got a call. Margaret had turned herself in. She handed the police her old notebook, all her fake filings, the letter to CPS, even her own key copies to the Thomases' house. She confessed to everything. She also left a letter. For me. Inside, she wrote, I wanted to control everything. Because I thought I had nothing else. But you stood up to me. I hated it. Then I realized. I raised a son who loved a woman who fights for herself. And that meant I did at least one thing right. I'm sorry. I'll face what's coming. She checked herself into a long-term psychiatric facility 2 days later. Voluntarily. 2 weeks later, we were woken up by sirens. The house next door, the Thomases' house, was on fire. Flames climbing through the 2nd floor. Neighbors running out in pajamas. Smoke pouring into the night sky. Brian and I ran outside, panicked. We called the Thomases. They were safe. Thank God, they'd gone out of town that weekend. Investigators said it was arson. But the strange part? Inside the crawlspace, someone had lit a bundle of Margaret's notebooks and clothing on fire. Only one person could have known where that spot was. Turns out, she escaped the facility during a night shift mix-up. No one noticed for 12 hours. The fire was her goodbye. Her final tantrum. The flames didn't take the house down. But they left deep scars in the walls. And in us. She was found walking barefoot 3 miles from the property. Mumbled something about cleansing the memory. They took her back. This time under tighter security. Months passed. Things calmed. But inside me, something didn't sit right. I kept thinking about how it started. When Margaret showed me that key the day after the wedding, I didn't argue. I smiled. I played her game. I hit back later. But maybe I should have spoken up then. Maybe I should have told Brian how serious it was before it blew up. I let her build that illusion of control. I waited to strike back like a chess game. Revenge instead of honesty. Maybe I let her feel like she had to fight me. I'm not saying it was all my fault, but I could have handled it better. I waited too long to draw the line. I smiled when I should have warned her to back off. And by the time I spoke up, the war had already started. Brian and I are still together. Still healing. We go to therapy. We have new locks. New cameras. A whole new bedroom set because I couldn't sleep in our old one anymore. The Thomases moved out. Said they needed a fresh start. I don't blame them. Sometimes I still look out the window, expecting to see her. Sometimes I still wonder if she watches us from somewhere. But then I remind myself we're stronger now. Because when you survive a fire, literal or emotional, you don't come out the same. You come out clearer. And you never let anyone move in next door to supervise again. Not in this lifetime.